Welcome to Tim's Antique Trains. Well, today's show is about the train show that took place in Cedarburg. I've never been to the Cedarburg Train Show. In fact, I did not even know it existed until a few weeks ago. So I really did not know what to expect. This turns out to be a fairly small show, packed with a few layouts and vendors. When I arrived at the building, the parking lot was packed, and I expected the show to be much bigger inside than it was. So after I walked inside and paid the very reasonable $3 entrance fee, I then began to look around. The first layout inside the door was the Metro HO Scale Club layout. I didn't quite catch the whole sign of the layout name. I have seen this layout before, and it's packed with a lot of detail. Most of the trains running were Milwaukee Road. Let's take a closer look. I noticed that there were several animated areas as I looked around the layout. I also observed that this layout appears to be operating on DC only, with standard cab control and an analog control panel on the end module of the layout. This is the most I recorded of the train displays, as it was the best and really the most interesting. The show was actually so small, only one layout of each scale was represented, although all scales were indeed represented here, so that's actually really neat. There were also 5 or 6 rows of vendors at this show, all packed together. When I got to the show, the rather small room was very crowded. As the day wore on, the crowd thinned out, making browsing the vendors easier. I chose not to video record any of the vendors, partly because I only have 2 hands, and I'm kinda busy shopping. So the name of my channel is Tim's Antique Trains. One of the goals of my collecting is, well, antique trains. I have several modern trains and they are fine, but I enjoy finding the real old ones and making them work again. Oftentimes the antique trains can be found at bargain prices compared to their modern siblings. Today I was specifically looking for trains made of metal, die-cast engines, sheet metal cars, or cast metal anything really, and I found several great examples as well as several, well, let's just say unusual finds.
First thing I'll do is check.
The next layout to this one is the Kettle Moraine Ballast Scorchers N scale layout. You can always tell it's theirs because they have a very loud police siren in the background of one of the displays. The first train I saw here was the European steamer buzzing around. The Chicago Northwestern passenger train is always a favorite of mine, but I came back to this one because I noticed that the E unit had a sound decoder inside. I was very surprised, but they really pack a lot into these tiny engines.
HO S, which is like American Flyer, We're going up, and then O gauge downwards from the HO is an N scale, and then Z scale is a small.
Very good running in.
Sure looks nice though.
Oh, they look nice.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah.
After this is the Whiz Kids Z-scale layout, which is so tiny it is always fascinating to see. This time they were running a very shiny chrome Burlington set. They were also testing a steam engine, but it was having some trouble going. Next, I saw a super small but highly detailed S-scale layout. This happens to be my favorite at the show, partly because it's S-scale and partly because of the amazing amount of detail. Lots of fantasy, including the Ghostbusters fighting the Michelin Man. So cool. The other interesting fact is that the train is not a vintage American flyer like all of mine are. Although it is the same scale, it is a modern manufacture. Something I'd like to get, but the new S-scale items are really out of my price range.
That thing was annoying. I like them quiet.
Yeah. Back when it's got it when they first turn it on. Now somebody stopped.
Yeah.
Down to 2 bucks. Scale equipment, but I do have a lot of flyer at home.
Yeah.
I was going to bring one of my flyer steam engines.
Okay.
It choo-choos and smokes.
Yeah, I had a, back in the 80s, I had a fire still. And it didn't run when I got it, so I took it. At that time, I didn't know how to fix it, get it to run, so I took it to
Am I getting too close to this?
I sold it. It was one of the better engines that ran with much better. Now you got to say.
Here's a shot of the O-scale layout. Just 2 trains running in a loop. There was also a G-scale layout, and I did not record any of that. Speaking of interesting, now let's head to my basement to see what I ended up with. Okay, well, here we are. As you can see, I ended up with several items in this haul. Oh, wait, let me remove them from the bags first. Okay, here we go, that's better. Let's start here with this little all-metal Tyco 040 steamer. This engine also has a European-style coupler on the front, great for doing switching work on my Varney train. These next 2 cars aren't metal, but I bought them because they are in good shape. Actually, I had one of these on my childhood railroad. However, the trucks fell off or something like that and were missing, broken, whatever. Anyway, these are in great shape and happen to have Katy couplers on them, so not a bad find. Okay, on the left is an unmarked all-metal boxcar with no couplers or wheels. A great project for the future. The one located on the right is a Varney stock car, I believe. Not quite sure, but it will match my existing Varney freight train as it has the loop couplers to match. This car has some real interesting patina, although I might repaint it someday. Now, the car on the right is another metal stock car, again possibly by Varney, but this one happens to have been upgraded to Katy couplers. A nice find and fairly clean. This Santa Fe car is not metal, but it was included in a $5 grab bag of cars, and it happens to be a Varney, which is stamped into the plastic, so it's a keeper. The yellow and orange metal stock car I just showed was also part of this same grab bag of cars. Here's an interesting caboose. Now, I'd really like to find a clean Tyco Spirit of 76 F3 diesel, and actually, this is not even a Tyco caboose. It's a Bachmann. However, there is a couple more features that makes this kind of unique, including a really strange modification on the top. Someone added a yellow LED sticking right out of the top of the cupola. It's not wired to anything, and it really looks out of place on the top, sticking out like a yellow eyeball or something. Oh, also there's the conductor on the back platform. Nice touch. Here's a bunch of Tyco-style trucks with the K-horn couplers built in. I picked up as many as I could dig out of the tub on that vendor's table because these are very handy to have to replace broken cars and are actually kind of hard to find. They can be found on eBay once in a while, but usually for very ridiculous prices. Also picked up a pair of track connectors with power leads. Next, we go back to some metal rolling stock. This is again what I believe is a Varney kit, all-metal passenger car. Even though it is painted in the Santa Fe scheme, it is in really good shape and has KD couplers on it, as well as rubber corridor details on the ends of the car. Really neat detail piece. This will go great in my mismatched metal passenger train. Alright, before we get to the really strange items, let's take a look at my most expensive purchase, which is relative as it was only $35. But for me, I try not to spend more than that on any one item, and the only reason I got this is because it is a fully die-cast locomotive. It is a Mantua 462 Pacific locomotive. I am curious to see how well this one will operate and perform. It appears to be in good shape, although it does not have a smoke unit and it has a plastic tender. We will see. If I like it, I may keep it. Or maybe I will repaint the shell. Maybe I will turn it into a royal blue engine. Could be an interesting project down the road. Here's a short aluminum baggage car shell. Needs some wheels and then can be ushered into the mismatched metal passenger train. Next up is this shell for my Athearn Elko PA project. I'm kind of excited about this because I wanted to do a repaint of that engine, but the paint on the other shell was in perfectly good shape, and I didn't want to paint over it. But this shell has already got a custom paint job started, and it will be really easy to turn that into something sort of special. So stay tuned for that project coming up. Now we're getting into the really strange things. This is a chassis and partial drivetrain from a Gilbert HO diesel. Mostly here for the parts bin, and it was free. Now this is really weird. This caboose looks like it might have been an old Varney kit or something of that vintage. Anyways, it looks like it was very poorly assembled. One truck is larger than the other, the whole thing is disproportionate and warped and has a really odd toy-like appearance. I think with a proper set of trucks, however, and probably a new paint job, it will fit in just fine with my vintage metal trains. Last but not least, well, maybe it is least, is this monster of a tender. It's obviously hand-built, never been painted, but I have no idea what it was for. It's not to scale. It's too tall, it's too long, and the trucks are too small, even though it has 8 axles. Maybe it's supposed to go to a big boy or something like that, or some other giant HO engine, but I think because it is so tall, it's just oddly out of scale. Well, that is everything I found at the Cedarburg Trainshow. It's been a long time since I've gone to a train show and was lots of fun looking at the displays and browsing through the vendors. The vendors were interesting here. Some of them were hard to bargain with. One vendor had mountains of stuff on his tables, but his prices were really high. One vendor gave me a bunch of stuff for free, including the Elko PA shell, the Gilbert frame, and that giant tender. So that worked out really good.